October 4th, 2025, a Saturday afternoon in Tanzania. A man in uniform stares straight into the camera, not a politician, not a journalist, but a soldier. His voice is calm, steady, and final. Your government is stealing from you, and if we don't stop them, this nation will collapse. That man is Captain John Charles Tesha, an instructor in the Tanzanian Air Force. In a country that has not seen a military defection in over 60 years, his words hit like thunder. Within minutes, the video spread across TikTok, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Within hours, the entire nation was whispering the same question: has Tanzania's silence finally broken? The government tried to erase the video. Too late. The message had escaped, and so had the truth. 2 days later, Tesha was discharged. His whereabouts remain unknown. But behind that brief video lies a much deeper story, one of promises betrayed, of hope strangled by the same system it once tried to change. Because Tanzania, once called the heart of African stability, now trembles under the weight of fear and forgotten ideals. It began with a leader's mysterious death. It deepened under a president who swore to heal the nation but chose to walk with the old guard instead. And now it explodes in the words of a soldier who decided that silence was no longer loyalty. So what makes a decorated officer throw away his career and perhaps his life just to speak out? What does it take for a nation known for peace to reach its breaking point? And most importantly, is this the beginning of Tanzania's awakening or the final fall of its democracy? Stay with us, because this story isn't just about one man or one country. It's about how power corrupts, how truth survives, and how Africa's new generation from Tanzania to Burkina Faso is refusing to be silent. Please share if you believe that truth is more important than the headlines. Subscribe if you stand with those who dare to speak when silence becomes betrayal. To understand why Captain Tesha risked everything we have, to go back to the moment when Tanzania lost its compass. It was March 2021. The nation woke to shocking news. President John Magufuli was dead. For 18 days, the bulldozer of Tanzania had vanished from public view. Officials said it was a heart problem, but most suspected COVID. The irony was unbearable. Magufuli had spent months insisting the virus didn't exist. He was a man of contradictions, fierce, proud, deeply Tanzanian. He built roads with his own hands, fired corrupt officials on live television, and dared to confront Western mining companies that had long plundered the nation's gold. For many, he embodied the return of African dignity. But there was another side: journalists silenced, newspapers banned, opposition rallies crushed. Magufuli's love for Tanzania came with fear, and yet when he died, millions mourned, because for all his faults he cared. Then came Samia Suluhu Hassan, his vice president, a soft-spoken woman from Zanzibar. In that historic moment, she became Tanzania's first female president and the first woman to lead any nation in East Africa. The world applauded. Headlines called it a new dawn. Western diplomats smiled. Donors returned. And for a brief moment, it felt like Tanzania could breathe again. Samia released political prisoners, restored some press freedom, and publicly admitted that COVID was real. For a people exhausted by years of fear, she was hope in human form, calm, motherly, pragmatic. But what few realized was that Samia had inherited not just a country, but a machine, a ruling system older than most of its citizens. The CCM party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, the party of the revolution. Since 1977, it had ruled Tanzania without interruption. No president, no parliament, no election had ever escaped its shadow. It was founded on Julius Nyerere's dream of unity and African socialism, a vision of self-reliance and equality. But half a century later, that dream had hardened into routine, and routine had decayed into control. The ideology died, only the power survived. Samia walked into a room filled with ghosts, retired generals, tycoons, ex-presidents, the old guard who had outlived every reform, every rebellion. They didn't care that she was a woman. They cared that she might disturb the system, so she faced a choice: fight them and risk everything, or join them and stay president. By 2022, her reforms slowed. By 2023, they stopped. And by 2024, the old script was back. Media bans, arbitrary arrests, opposition rallies declared illegal gatherings. On August 11, 2024, police arrested over 500 people in a single-day opposition, leaders, youth activists, and journalists, simply for planning to mark International Youth Day. They were released a few days later, just long enough to send a message: we can take you anytime we want. But what truly broke Tanzania's spirit wasn't the arrests. It was the disappearances. The Tanzania Law Society documented 83 people missing in 1 year. Names without graves, families without answers, opposition members snatched from their homes at night, taxi drivers vanishing after giving a ride to the wrong passenger. And then came the body of Ali Muhammad Kibao, found on a shoreline, beaten, tortured, acid poured over his face. After that, people stopped speaking. Social media went quiet. Activists disappeared not only from the streets, but from conversation itself. And as fear spread, one man in uniform kept watching from a distance, seeing the democracy he once swore to defend collapsing into silence. That man was Captain John Tesha. He had served under Magufuli, admired his defiance, and despised what the nation had become under Samia. When he turned on his camera that October afternoon, he wasn't just defying the government. He was speaking to a nation that had lost its reflection. Your government is stealing from you, and if we don't stop them, this nation will collapse. Those words were not a declaration of rebellion, they were a cry of conscience. And that is where the story of Tanzania's unraveling truly begins. When Captain Tesha's video spread across Tanzania, it was more than a message, it was an earthquake. For the first time in decades, the silence cracked. Within hours, TikTok clips were circulating through villages that had never seen a protest before. WhatsApp groups in Arusha, Dodoma, and Zanzibar buzzed with the same question: is this the moment the government scrambled? They tried to erase the video, to trace IP addresses, to arrest anyone who shared it. But like smoke in the wind, it had already spread across East Africa. And it wasn't just Tesha's words that shocked the nation, it was the truth behind them. Because by then, Tanzanians were already living through something darker than censorship. People weren't just being silenced, they were disappearing. The Tanzanian Law Society, the National Bar Association, had quietly documented 83 missing persons, 83 families waiting for someone to come home. A father named Dion Kipa, a party organizer, vanished after a phone call. 2 student activists, Deo Soa and Jacob Godwin, were taken by men claiming to be police. None have been seen since. Then came the case that changed everything: Ali Muhammad Kibao, a senior opposition member, kidnapped in broad daylight while traveling by bus. 2 days later, his body was found dumped near the shore, tortured, burned, disfigured with acid. The nation froze. If they could do this to a known politician, what chance did anyone else have? But even fear has limits, and Tanzania was about to discover them. In September 2024, the country's largest newspaper, The Citizen, decided to do something unthinkable. They released a short animated video online, a cartoon of the president sitting on a couch flipping through TV channels as real families appeared on each screen pleading for their missing loved ones. It was satire, gentle yet devastating. And the reaction? Fury. Within 24 hours, the government suspended the entire media company, not just the cartoon, but every outlet it owned: print, online, radio, everything. The Tanzania Communication Regulatory Authority declared the video a threat to national unity. But unity for whom the families in that cartoon were real. The disappeared were real. And for many Tanzanians, that short animation felt like a mirror the first time someone dared to show the nation its reflection. The shutdown backfired. While newspapers went silent, conversations roared online. Some defended Samia Suluhu Hassan, claiming the backlash was sexist, that male leaders were never attacked this way. Others fired back: this isn't about gender, it's about justice. A new slogan appeared on social media: dictatorship has no gender. That phrase would echo through the coming months. Then, in April 2025, the story reached a boiling point. Tundu Lissu, the main opposition leader, was charged with treason, a crime punishable by death. His offense, a speech calling for electoral reform. It was déjà vu. 8 years earlier, gunmen had pumped 16 bullets into his car. He had survived, gone into exile, endured 19 surgeries, and returned to fight again. Now he was behind bars, awaiting a trial that would never come. The government scheduled it 5 times, then postponed it 5 times. The point was not to prosecute him, it was to erase him. When foreign lawyers from Kenya and Uganda tried to defend him, they were detained and deported at the airport. Among them were respected figures, former Kenyan Chief Justice Willy Mutunga and activist Boniface Mwangi. President Samia's government warned of foreign interference, but Tanzanians heard something else fear. And then came the spark. October 18, 2025, just 2 weeks after Tesha's viral video, John Heche, the deputy chairman of the opposition party, tried to cross the border into Kenya to attend Raila Odinga's funeral, the Pan-African icon who had inspired generations. Immigration officers seized his passport and detained him. He went live on his phone. Within 3 hours, hundreds of people, Kenyans and Tanzanians alike, gathered outside the immigration post. No violence, no looting. Just a crowd of young faces holding their phones high. 6 hours later, the government released him. For the first time in years, power blinked. The people had discovered something stronger than fear: visibility. When the world watches governments hesitate. That day, the youth of East Africa learned a lesson that no army could teach. You don't need weapons to fight tyranny. You only need to stand together and refuse to disappear. By late October 2025, Tanzania was no longer the quiet nation it once claimed to be. Something irreversible had been set in motion. The disappearances, the arrests, the fear, they had reshaped the country's soul. In the cities, parents told their children not to talk politics, not even online. In the villages, neighbors avoided each other's eyes, afraid that a careless word could become an accusation. Journalists deleted years of archives. Activists changed their SIM cards every week. Taxi drivers whispered, "Don't drive too close to the government offices at night." A new kind of silence settled, not the silence of peace, but the silence of survival. And yet beneath that silence, a quiet rebellion was growing. In small community halls, teachers and students began organizing reading circles, discussing history and the Constitution in coded language. In the universities, professors turned off the lights and spoke of democracy through metaphors and poems. On social media, anonymous accounts began sharing information again, cautiously, cleverly using humor as camouflage. It was the kind of resistance that grows not in the streets, but in the shadows. But the political structure above remained intact, a fortress of power built by CCM, guarded by loyal generals, and funded by business magnates who had survived every president since independence. The state now functioned like a pyramid, fear at the base, privilege at the top, and propaganda holding everything together. Then came the final insult, the 2025 election. Opposition leader Tundu Lissu was still in prison facing a death penalty charge. His trial had become a ghost ritual, postponed again and again, while government-controlled TV called him a national threat. Meanwhile, the CCM party rolled out a campaign so massive that it felt less like democracy and more like a coronation. Billboards everywhere, green flags in every village. The other political parties allowed to run were little more than stage props, tolerated only to make the process look plural. Independent observers privately predicted a 99% victory, the same suspicious figure seen in past local elections. And when that number appeared again on election night, nobody was surprised. Nobody celebrated, because by then everyone understood the vote was never about choice. It was about control. But while the politicians celebrated their own inevitability, the people's hearts had changed. In living rooms across Dar es Salaam, families replayed Tesha's forbidden video. They didn't speak, they just listened. To many, Tesha was no longer a traitor. He was the voice they couldn't raise themselves. Some began calling him the Ibrahim Traoré of Tanzania, the soldier who dared to defy the system in the name of the people. Even within the military, whispers began. Younger officers admired his courage. Older commanders feared his influence. The armed forces, once the pride of Tanzanian stability, were now divided between loyalty to the president and loyalty to the nation. And through it all, the woman once celebrated as Africa's great reformer was now ruling a country that had lost its reflection. President Samia Suluhu Hassan, once hailed as the healer, had become the symbol of the wound. Outside the borders, regional powers watched carefully. Inside, ordinary Tanzanians asked the question that every generation eventually faces: if the law cannot protect us, what does it mean to be a citizen? No one dared to answer aloud, but in whispers, one phrase began to echo again and again: one day the truth will return. From Washington to Brussels, the official statements were predictable, cautious phrases wrapped in diplomacy. Concerned about the situation, monitoring developments closely, encouraging stability. Stability, that word again, the West's favorite illusion in Africa. While citizens vanished, while journalists were silenced, while an Air Force officer called for the nation to wake up, the international community said little. Because to them, Tanzania wasn't a crisis, it was a model. No coups, no open war. a woman president who spoke the language of reform and cooperation. That was enough to earn silence, and silence is the most valuable political currency in global diplomacy. The United States, which had once celebrated Samia Suluhu Hassan as a symbol of democratic renewal, quietly avoided comment on Tesha's disappearance. State Department briefings described Tanzania as a key regional partner for security and counterterrorism. In other words, as long as she kept the region calm, she could rule however she pleased. Europe took a similar tone. Foreign ministers praised Tanzania's economic resilience and commitment to gender equality. But behind the smiles, aid, money kept flowing, and no one asked where it really went. It was a familiar script, one Africa has seen for generations. Western governments claiming to defend democracy, but only when it's convenient. Silence when repression serves their strategic interests. Meanwhile, in another corner of the continent, a different kind of leadership was emerging, one that refused to trade sovereignty for approval. In Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré was redefining what independence could mean in the 21st century. He expelled foreign troops, reclaimed mining rights, and began building national industries from the ground up. For him, stability wasn't the absence of protest, it was the presence of dignity. That contrast did not go unnoticed. African journalists began asking hard questions. Why is the world applauding Tanzania's silence while condemning Burkina Faso's defiance? Why does control get rewarded and courage get punished? Across Africa, young people connected the dots. They saw how Western media praised peaceful democracies that hid their repression while demonizing nations that demanded independence. They realized that control could wear the mask of order and tyranny could wear the smile of progress. In Nairobi, Kigali, Kampala, even in Washington's own African policy circles, a quiet unease grew. Because if the story of Tanzania continued, if Tesha's rebellion inspired others, the old geopolitical balance would tremble. It would mean that Africa's soldiers, students, and citizens no longer needed permission to demand justice, and that for many in the global north is the greatest threat of all, not coup, not chaos, but clarity. A continent realizing that sovereignty is not granted by Washington, but claimed by its own people. In the end, history may remember two kinds of African leaders, those who ruled for comfort and those who ruled for courage. Samia chose comfort alliances, stability applause. Traoré chose courage, struggle, risk, and the respect of his people. And now, as the dust settles over Tanzania's 2025 election, one question crosses borders, echoing in every capital from Dodoma to DC. Will the world keep rewarding silence, or finally listen to Africa's voice when it refuses to whisper? There's a Swahili proverb that says, "When the monkey's day to die comes, all the trees become slippery." It means that when the truth's time arrives, even the lies that protected it begin to fail. And tonight, Tanzania is standing on that edge. Captain Tesha's video may have been deleted, but his message cannot be. Every time someone shares it in secret, whispers it in a cafe, or remembers the words, "Your government is stealing from you," it becomes harder for those in power to hide behind stability and slogans. The question now is not whether Tanzania will change, but how much suffering it will take before it does. Because a nation built on fear cannot stay upright forever. Sooner or later, the silence will break either through ballots or through bravery. And yet beyond the fear, something remarkable is happening. Ordinary African soldiers, farmers, students are beginning to see that democracy without dignity is just another kind of prison. From Burkina Faso to Mali, from Niger to Tanzania, a new consciousness is rising, one that values sovereignty over approval, substance over ceremony. It is not a call for violence, it is a call for vision. In Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré once said, "The true revolution is not made with guns, but with truth." And that truth is now spreading quietly, relentlessly, across a continent long taught to obey. For Tanzania, the next chapter has not yet been written. But history has already marked the beginning of its reckoning, a soldier with nothing left to lose, a nation pretending everything is fine, and a world that looks away until it can't anymore. So tonight, ask yourself, what does freedom look like when fear becomes normal? What does leadership mean when power is protected but people are not? And if Africa's younger generation is ready to risk everything for justice, are we, the rest of the world, ready to listen? Because silence is never neutral. It always serves someone. And when the day comes, when the trees finally turn slippery, history will remember not just the tyrants who spoke, but the witnesses who stayed quiet. Please share if you believe that Africa deserves leaders who serve their people, not their power. Subscribe if you believe that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is still worth telling.